When did you first realize that you had to grow up? Hang up your fishing rod and go to work. What a terrible thing. Hmm? Still a kid at heart? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Some people never do. Seems that way. Every time you had to watch your little brother. Mm-hmm. Told you. Mm-hmm. All right. Anybody else? Boy, oh boy. How do we determine when we are grown up? Is it just because our hair turns gray? It helps? I don't know. Growing older is not necessarily the same thing as growing wiser, right? Well, one will lead to the other. Yep. One will lead to the other. Signs of aging do not necessarily equal signs of maturity. The day you accepted Christ was the day you finally realized things gotta, okay. Yeah. Now, the author of Hebrews talks about this a little bit in Hebrews chapter 5, and he addresses these things with respect to the lack of maturity. Um, Hebrews 5, beginning in verse 12. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you have need again for someone to teach you the elementary principles of the oracles of God. And you've come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. Therefore, leaving the elementary teaching about the Christ, let us press on to maturity, not laying again a foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith toward God, of instruction about washing and laying on of hands and resurrection of the dead and eternal judgment, and this we shall do if God permits. Jesus seems to be concerned that some people are perpetually immature. Know anybody like that? You have need again for someone to teach you the fundamentals. You're still taking in milk and baby food. You're not eating solid food yet. Now, by elementary teachings, he's referring to Old Testament signs and sacrifices and so on, and he's basically saying we've gone beyond all that, and you've got to move beyond the gospel. You got to move beyond the gospel, and you have to. You've heard it, you've responded to it, you've believed it. Now you got to start growing. And you got to move beyond these things and get in the area of teaching and learning that probes deeper into life. Time to grow up. And that's solid food, and that results in spiritual strength and growth and leaving the ABCs of the faith. How does Sunday morning church, in a lot of ways, how does Sunday morning church get this wrong? Hmm? Emma? Okay. 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 Uh-huh. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Laura? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. Right. Check the box. Yep. Just check the box. Mm-hmm. Gloria? Yep. Yep. Okay. All right. Yeah. Sometimes it's just vain rep. It almost seems like vain repetition, and it almost seems like we have relegated Sunday morning um, for the purposes of evangelism. And I think that becomes more the case the larger the crowd. In a larger crowd, you have the potential for more unbelievers to be present, and so you lighten it, and you're constantly getting an invitation every single week. And it may seem radical for me to say this, not that I've ever said anything radical before, um, but I don't think that's the purpose of Sunday morning. It really is not. Sunday morning is not the place for evangelism. Now that doesn't mean that we don't evangelize, and that doesn't mean that we don't share the gospel, because we do. But by far and large, Sunday morning is the time for us to go deeper, to grow in our understanding. Um, it's not the pastor's job to evangelize the lost. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't evangelize as the pastor, because the pastor is a Christian just like everybody else, or ought to be. Um, but it's, the responsibility of the pastor teacher is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, right? And you can't be equipped if all you're doing is just going over the basics again and again and again and again. How do you grow in any depth if it's just salvation, 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 salvation? Now, don't misunderstand, I'm certainly not knocking salvation, because obviously that's the starting point. But each of us has the responsibility to be able to take that and share it with somebody else before we invite them to church. Don't invite them to church just because, you hope that pastor gives an invitation on Sunday. Maybe they ought not to understand everything that's being said because of the depth of the subject matter, because it's a place where we grow deeper. It used to be, the further south you went, it used to be that Sunday evening services were designated as your evangelism times. And if you had an unbeliever friend that you were going to invite, you would invite him Sunday night, because that was where, your evangelistic gospel focus was. That used to be the case. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yep, very true. Mhm. So, there comes a point where, spiritually speaking, we need to stop playing with blocks and we need to get a little deeper. How does that happen? It doesn't happen just on Sunday morning. Yes. Hmm. Yeah. If your only exposure to God's Word is Sunday morning, you're missing it. Totally missing it. Um, that's do not depend on just preaching and teaching on the weekends for your sustenance. I don't decry that, of course. I mean, that's my job security. But it's more, teaching and preaching ought to be more like food supplements to an already healthy diet. Well, how do we mature? Well, there are a number of checkpoints that Peter gives us as we continue in our study. We're looking at chapter 3. And yes, there are a number of outward signs that come along with physical growth and aging, but spiritually there is another kind of growth chart, and he gives us 8 excuse me. He gives us 8 checkpoints for maturity to look at. Chapter 3, beginning in verse 8. Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. 8 checkpoints, and we'll probably get through the first part of them today. But the first one is unity. Unity. Have unity of mind. Let all be harmonious. It's referring to oneness of heart, a similarity of purpose, an agreement when it comes to major points of doctrine. Unity. What is unity not? Uniformity. And unfortunately, as we have talked from time to time, especially in Peter's letter, as we've gone back and forth dealing with legalism, that's the legalistic definition of unity is uniformity. We all look the same, we all sound the same, we all smell the same, we all, comb our hair the same way, but, and that's not what he's talking about. It's not sameness from that standpoint. It's not forming identical convictions and always preferring the same exact thing. That's a cracker box mentality. That's cookie cutter mentality. Peter isn't promoting uniformity. He's also not talking about unanimity. where there's 100% agreement on everything. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be disagreeable. I had an old fella in my first church, and it didn't make any difference what the issue was. He would always vote no. Always. Now, you could count on it. And his mindset was, well, somebody needs to. Might as well be me. You know, just to mix it up a little bit. Good old Harold Carson. Yeah. Yeah. The secret of this kind of, I'm sorry. I think I caught something from the grandkids. This kind of harmony is not dealing with the peripherals. It's concentrating on the common ground of Jesus Christ. The common ground of Jesus Christ. His model, His message, His mission. How mature are we in the area of unity? Are we in harmony with other believers in the family of God? Are we someone who works well, gets along well with others, who have different bents, different opinions, different likes and dislikes? The second checkpoint that he mentions is a mutual interest. Sympathetic. Let all be sympathetic. Okay? Have unity of mind, have sympathy. It means, literally, it means to feel with. This is, when the Bible says, weep with those who weep. Rejoice with those who rejoice. This is the absence of competition, the absence of jealousy, the absence of envy toward other believers. Romans says, be of the same mind toward one another. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. And if we're growing toward maturity, we share those mutual feelings. You know, when someone gets bad news, it affects you. When someone gets good news, it affects you. You know, we mentioned this morning, answer to prayer for Dan and Karen's family. You know, and everybody was excited about that. We've prayed for that fellow for a long time. And, a good, godly man with a young family. And he was not doing well. And my goodness, how the Lord has turned that around, and it's a wonderful thing. And we rejoice with them. Can you honestly say that you enter the feelings of the other person? When others hurt, do you find yourself hurting? When others celebrate, do you find yourself celebrating? When somebody gets a blessing or a promotion, do you rejoice with them or do you envy them? When they lose, do you feel like you've lost? Or do you feel a little tiny pinprick of satisfaction? Somebody said maturity begins to grow when you sense your concern for others outweighing your concern for yourself. That's good. Thirdly, an affectionate friendship. He calls it brotherly love. And that's from the word philos, Philadelphia, right? City of brotherly love. You wouldn't know it today, of course, but the love of an affectionate friend. Samuel Coleridge described friendship one time as a sheltering tree. Um, Longfellow said, "Ah, how good it feels, the hand of an old friend." Friends give comfort, don't they? We find strength near them, and they bear fruit that provides nourishment and encouragement. And when something troublesome comes into our lives, isn't it great to be able to pick up the phone and call a friend, needing the comfort that you know that they're going to be able to provide? Friends also care enough to hold us accountable, don't they? And we never doubt their love and their respect. Those are the type of friends that we need, friendships we should cultivate. That's the type of friend that we should desire to be toward others. Um, a circle of friends who lovingly hold us close regardless, people who care about our pain, people who are there for us when we just feel like we cannot make it on our own, and are being friends like that to them. As we mature, those friendships deepen. Then he mentions kind-heartedness or tender-heartedness. It translates compassion, and it's used to describe Jesus in the Gospels. Matthew 9:36. Seeing the multitudes, he felt compassion. That's the word that is used. Because they were distressed like sheep without a shepherd. Compassion, kindness. What does that look like? What is an example of compassion, kindness? Okay, seeing somebody in need and doing what you can to address the issue. Okay, okay. Even when they seem to be pushing you away, you still know that there's a need there, and you reach out, running the risk of getting bit or scratched in the process. Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. There is a story about Ronald Reagan um, that exhibits this. Ronald Reagan was very Lincoln-esque in his presidency, um, and his speechwriter was a gal named Peggy Noonan. You may remember, but she tells a story of a little old lady named Frances Green. She's 83 years old. And she lives by herself. She's on Social Security in a little town outside of San Francisco and had very little money. But for 8 years, she had sent $1 a year to the Republican National Committee. And one day, she got in the mail an RNC fundraising letter, a beautiful piece of cardstock that had it was a cream-colored paper, had black and gold lettering, and it invited the recipient to come to the White House to meet the president. She never noticed the little RSVP attached to the bottom that needed to be accompanied by a generous donation. She just thought that she had been invited because they appreciated her $1 a year. So Frances scraped up every cent that she had, and she took a 4-day train ride across the United States. And she couldn't afford a sleeper car, so she slept upright in a chair in coach. And finally, she got to Washington, and she got to the White House gate. This little elderly woman with white hair, white powder all over her face, white stockings, an old hat with white netting, an all-white dress now yellowed with age. And when she got to the guard, her name wasn't on the list. And she was devastated. She was absolutely heartbroken. She could not go in. A Ford Motor Company executive was standing in line behind her and saw what had happened. And realizing that something was wrong, he pulled Frances to the side and he listened to her story. And he asked her if she would come back the next day at 9 o'clock the next morning and meet him there, and she agreed that she would. And in the meantime, he made contact with one of the presidential aides and got permission to give Frances a tour of the White House and to introduce her to the president. And when he heard about the story, President Reagan, of course, agreed that he would meet her. Now, that next day was anything but calm and easy in the White House. It was the day that Ed Meese had just resigned. There had been a military uprising abroad, and the president was in and out of some very high-level meetings. And Frances Greene shows up at 9 o'clock, full of expectation, full of enthusiasm. So this Ford executive meets her and gives her a wonderful tour of the White House. And then quietly, he's walking her by the Oval Office in hopes that maybe she can get a peek in and see the president there. And they're going by, and members of the National Security Council are going in and out, and some high-ranking generals are buzzing all over the place. And in the midst of all the hubbub, the president looks up and he sees little Frances Greene. And with that big smile, he welcomes her into the Oval Office. And as she enters, he rises from his desk and greets her, and he calls out to her and he says, "Frances, those darn computers, they fouled up again. If I had known that you were coming, I would have come out to the gate and welcomed you myself." And he invited her to sit down, and he sat across from her, and they talked leisurely about California and her town and her life and her family. Now, the President of the United States gave Frances Greene a lot of time that day, more time than he had. And some would say that it was a waste of time, but not to anyone who knew Ronald Reagan. And Peggy Noonan goes on and she says, he knew that this woman had nothing to give him, but she needed something that he could give her. And so he took the time to be kind and compassionate. It's a cute little story. A tender heart. Tender-hearted. When it's inconvenient, when it's off schedule, when you don't feel like you can deliver, That's part of what it's about. Well, we're going to pick it up there next time and finish with the rest of that checklist. Don't forget, 5 o'clock tonight. Hopefully I will still be in voice. I feel like I'm coming down with something. It's just all sitting right here. Ugh. But we'll see you at 5. Spread the word. Don't be late.